Most theatrical releases follow a familiar rhythm. Trailers build hype, posters line theater walls, showtimes fill the schedules, and audiences filter in to see what the studio has prepared for them. But woven into the history of action cinema is a stranger pattern, one marked not by celebration but by disappearance. These are the films that arrived quietly, played briefly, and were then removed from the screen with barely a trace, as if someone decided their presence in the world needed to be corrected before too many people noticed. No scandal triggered the retreat. No controversy forced the studio's hand. The films simply slipped in and then slipped away. Across decades, these sudden withdrawals form an eerie pattern. Movies that debut at the end of a week but are gone before the next weekend begins. Screenings that vanish between matinee and evening. Titles that appear in listings only to be replaced by something else when audiences arrive at the theater. The messages sent to projection booths are terse. The explanations, when given at all, are vague. And the silence that follows invites suspicion. It's not just that these movies failed, it's that they were removed before the world even had a chance to decide whether they deserved to survive. Behind these disappearances lie stories of tangled rights negotiations, collapsing distribution companies, rebranded productions, last-minute edits, territorial conflicts, and sometimes nothing more than the panic of executives unwilling to risk embarrassment. Some of these films were caught in internal disputes. Some faced legal complications. Others simply landed at the wrong moment in the wrong market. Yet all share one unsettling trait. Their theatrical lives were cut short with almost surgical precision. Tonight, we step into the dim corridor where these forgotten releases are stored. We revisit the openings that barely happened, the screenings witnessed by only a handful of people, and the films whose fates were rewritten behind closed doors. These are the action movies pulled from theaters without explanation, ghosts of the silver screen, erased almost as soon as they appeared. Fact 1. Liberty and Bash, 1989. When Liberty and Bash briefly surfaced in theaters, its appearance was so fleeting that many moviegoers never realized the film had been released at all. The production had endured months of internal disputes, uncertain rewrites, mid-shoot course changes, and a final cut that reportedly pleased no one. By the time prints were circulated, the studio's enthusiasm had dwindled into quiet resignation. But the true puzzle wasn't the troubled production, it was the speed with which the film was erased. Exhibitors in several regions reported receiving abrupt messages, instructing them to remove the title almost immediately after it opened. No reason accompanied the request, no clarification followed, and no public acknowledgement was offered. Some insiders claimed the studio feared the embarrassment of abysmal early numbers, while others whispered that contractual performance clauses might have triggered financial penalties. The studio wasn't willing to risk. Whatever happened behind closed doors, the film's theatrical life dissolved faster than its advertising cycle, leaving behind only a faint record that it ever reached the big screen. Fact 2. Chain of Command, 1994. For a film starring Michael Dudikoff, an actor who had long commanded a loyal action genre following the near-instant disappearance of Chain of Command, was nothing short of bewildering. Promotion was minimal from the start. Trailers were scarce, posters were delayed, and showtimes seemed to fluctuate by the hour. In some cities, the movie appeared briefly in listings before being replaced with no reference or explanation. In others, it screened for a single day before vanishing altogether. Industry conversations suggested that tension between international rights holders and the domestic distributor reached a breaking point just as the film was hitting theaters. If territorial agreements were compromised, the fastest damage control strategy would have been to pull the film before ticket sales accumulated. Another possibility was economic. With home video markets surging, the distributor may have concluded that a theatrical push was unnecessary and potentially unprofitable. Regardless of the motive, the film's presence in theaters was so minimal that even dedicated fans questioned whether it ever had a legitimate release. Fact 3. Steel. Justice. Omianoasute obsech shishapta. Steel Justice seemed poised to ride the wave of 80 seconds action cinema with its gritty tone and revenge-driven storyline, yet its theatrical impact barely registered. In several markets, screenings were abruptly canceled within days of opening. In others, the film was advertised but never actually shown, as if the release itself had collapsed under its own uncertainty. The studio offered no communication, not to critics, not to exhibitors, not to anyone seeking clarity. Behind the scenes, the picture was far murkier. Reports of disastrous test screenings circulated, suggesting that executives panicked at the prospect of negative reception spreading beyond a limited audience. With internal restructuring happening simultaneously, the studio allegedly prioritized more promising projects, leaving Steel Justice to quietly wither. Instead of a traditional rollout, the film experienced a rapid, almost surgical removal, resulting in a theatrical existence that felt like an unfinished thought, erased before it had the chance to stand on its own. Fact 4. Stickfighter. 1009. 194. When Stickfighter slipped into the release schedule, it did so with barely enough visibility to register. But what made its presence truly strange was how fast it was erased. Some theaters reported screening it only once or twice before quiet directives arrived, instructing them to remove it from their lineups. Others received promotional materials yet never got the actual print on time, only to be told later that the film would not be shown after all. It was as if the movie's release had been planned and canceled simultaneously. Whispers in distribution circles pointed to technical inconsistencies between prints, with projectionists mentioning problematic reels that caused abrupt audio or visual issues. Another theory suggested a calculated retreat. The studio may have realized that the burgeoning home video market would give the film a better chance than a lukewarm theatrical debut. Rather than risk critical scrutiny or negative buzz, they withdrew it before too many eyes could land on it. The result was a theatrical run so minimal and disjointed that Stickfighter became one of those titles spoken about only by the few who managed to catch it before it evaporated. Fact 5. The Base 1999. The Base arrived with the branding of a straightforward military action thriller, yet its theatrical stay was surprisingly short. In multiple markets, the film appeared briefly, sometimes for a single weekend, before being pulled without explanation. Theater managers described receiving sudden removal notices with no accompanying details. One day, the movie was on the marquee. The next, it was gone, replaced by a title with more stable support. Industry insiders floated two prevailing theories. One involved a behind-the-scenes legal dispute concerning story rights that may have surfaced just as the film reached theaters. The other centered on economics. Early box office indicators suggested returns would be too small to justify continuing the rollout, prompting the studio to cut losses before they grew. Whatever the catalyst, the outcome was the same. The Base vanished from cinemas rapidly, resurfacing almost immediately in the video market, where the distributor could control the narrative without public scrutiny. Fact 6. Diplomatic Siege 1999. With noted names like Peter Weller and Daryl Hannah, Diplomatic Siege appeared equipped for at least a modest theatrical presence. Instead, its release was marked by abrupt cancellations and puzzling inconsistencies. Some theaters advertised it but never screened it. Others opened it for a single weekend before receiving terse instructions to package the reels for return. The disappearance was swift and unexplained, leaving both audiences and exhibitors in the dark. Behind closed doors, the situation was reportedly far more chaotic. A dispute over the film's final cut had divided producers and studio executives, with each side championing a different version. When neither camp yielded, the studio may have concluded that withdrawing the release altogether was the least damaging option. This quiet retreat ensured the film avoided critical attention and controversy, but it also condemned Diplomatic Siege to a near-invisible theatrical life, one remembered only by those who caught it during its brief, flickering moment on the big screen. Fact 2. Detention 2003. Detention, starring Dolph Lundgren, entered the release calendar with the promise of a gritty, school-set siege thriller, yet its theatrical life played out more like an administrative mistake than a genuine rollout. In several markets, the film appeared on internal booking sheets, only for theaters to discover sometimes hours before showtime that screenings had been canceled without explanation. Other locations managed to run it briefly, but only for a day or two before sudden messages arrived instructing them to pull it immediately. Audiences who caught those rare early showings didn't realize they were witnessing something that would vanish almost instantly. Those familiar with the distribution process whispered that the theatrical release existed merely to fulfill obligations tied to international contracts. Once the film technically played in a handful of theaters, the studio no longer had a reason to keep it on screens. Another theory pointed to unusually harsh early feedback that spooked executives, convincing them that maintaining the rollout would do more harm than good. With stakes low and the home video market ready to absorb the film, detention was retracted so quietly that many fans still doubt it ever played theatrically at all. Fact 8. Deadly Prey, 1987. Although Deadly Prey is now celebrated as a cult gem, its original theatrical appearance was chaotic and extremely short-lived. Newspapers in certain regions listed showtimes for a limited run, yet by the middle of the week, the title had disappeared from schedules with no notice. Some theaters claimed they were instructed to stop screenings immediately. Others said they never received all the reels required to show the film. In rare cases, projectionists reportedly improvised by using incomplete prints before being told to shut the film down entirely. What lay beneath this confusion was a larger problem. The film's distributor was in financial distress. When early attendance failed to meet even the most modest expectations, continuing the release would have required funds the distributor simply didn't have. Pulling the film early prevented further losses and allowed the company to focus on more stable video revenue instead. This abrupt retreat transformed Deadly Prey into one of the decade's most elusive action releases, a movie that existed on the big screen in theory, but barely in practice. Fact 9. American Ninja V. 1997. For a franchise with a recognizable name and a steady fan base, the near-invisible theatrical release of American Ninja 5 remains one of its biggest mysteries. In certain regions, the film was advertised but never screened. Other theaters received prints but were instructed to drop the film from their schedules almost immediately after opening. Some territories ran it only once. Others didn't run it at all, despite posters already hanging in the lobby. It was a release so fragmented that even longtime fans remain unsure whether it truly reached theaters. What fueled the confusion was a revelation that surfaced later. The movie hadn't been created as an American Ninja installment. It was reportedly rebranded late in production to capitalize on the franchise's commercial value. That decision may have triggered last-minute contractual conflicts or distribution disputes involving the original rights holders. Instead of navigating a potentially expensive legal tangle, the distributor appeared to take the quietest route, pull the film before anyone drew too much attention to the unexpected rebranding. The result was a theatrical rollout so scattered and brief that it remains one of the franchise's most debated chapters. Fact 10. Rapid Fire, 1992. Although Rapid Fire would eventually earn recognition as a key entry in Brandon Lee's short but influential filmography, its theatrical rollout in some regions was marked by abrupt interruptions. There were theaters that screened it for only a handful of showings before receiving unexpected instructions to replace it. In other places, the movie was advertised but quietly removed from listings the moment opening weekend arrived. For a film led by a rising action star with clear commercial appeal, these disappearances felt strangely deliberate. Industry insiders floated several explanations. One theory suggested the studio was unsure how to position the film amid shifting conversations around Lee's image and the broader action landscape. Another pointed to behind-the-scenes disagreements between domestic and international distributors, creating fractures in the release strategy that led to sudden cancellations. Still others suspected that the studio, wary of early box office projections, scaled back the rollout before disappointing numbers became part of the public record. Whatever the cause, Rapid Fire entered theaters tentatively and exited them just as quickly, leaving behind a theatrical footprint that was more fragmented than its legacy deserved. Fact 11. Extreme Justice, 1993. With Lou Diamond Phillips and Scott Glenn headlining, Extreme Justice seemed engineered to make an impact in the action thriller arena. Its gritty premise, a covert police unit operating outside the law, carried enough edge to attract attention, but also enough controversy to make studios nervous. As the film approached release, that nervousness appeared to take over. In multiple cities, it opened quietly, only to be pulled within days. In others, marketing materials arrived, but screenings never materialized. It felt less like a rollout and more like a retreat. Inside Hollywood circles, whispers suggested the decision was rooted in political sensitivity. Real-world debates over law enforcement abuse were dominating headlines, and releasing a film that depicted rogue policing may have risked backlash the studio wasn't prepared to handle. Rather than confront the conversation, executives reportedly opted for silence, removing the film from theaters before attention could gather. Afterward, extreme justice was funneled into cable and home video markets, where scrutiny was lighter and controversy less likely to escalate. The resulting theatrical run was so faint that many viewers never realized it had played on the big screen at all. Fact 12. Martial Outlaw, 1993. As one of Jeff Wincott's prime-era martial arts vehicles, Martial Outlaw should have found at least a small foothold in theaters. Instead, its release unraveled almost immediately. Some cinemas received only partial reels or prints in poor condition, making it impossible to screen the film at all. Others reported that after a few early showings, sudden orders arrived, instructing them to halt screenings and prepare the reels for return. With the distributor offering no explanation, exhibitors were left confused and audiences unaware that the film had ever appeared. Those familiar with the movie's path behind the scenes described a distribution arm on the verge of collapse, marketing budgets slashed, booking fees unpaid, and arguments breaking out over which version of the film should be presented. Faced with logistical and financial instability, the company appeared to choose withdrawal over embarrassment. Before the film could generate any real momentum, its theatrical run evaporated. In the end, Martial Outlaw bypassed the big screen almost entirely, surviving mainly through home video circulation and the small but loyal fan base that followed Wincott's work. Fact 13. Hollow Point, 1996. Even with Thomas Ian Griffith and Donald Sutherland anchoring the cast, Hollow Point barely left an imprint on the theatrical landscape. In several regions, the film managed a short, almost symbolic appearance, screened briefly before disappearing from marquees without warning. Some theaters recalled receiving all the standard promotional materials, yet the film itself arrived inconsistently, sometimes late, sometimes incomplete. Others hosted a single showing before abrupt instructions came in to pull the title. The rollout felt disjointed, improvised, and ultimately abandoned. Industry speculation pointed towards severe financial strain within the distributing company. Competing titles demanded resources the studio no longer had, forcing them to prioritize bigger bets. Mid-budget action films like Hollow Point were the first casualties. Another theory suggested that competing distributors pressured exhibitors to clear screens for upcoming blockbusters, leaving the film with no breathing room. Whatever the truth, Hollow Point slipped into and out of theaters so quietly that it became one of the decade's least seen releases, acknowledged by marketing, but barely witnessed on the big screen. Fact 14. US Seals 2000. U.S. Seals arrived during a wave of renewed interest in military action thrillers, yet its theatrical existence was almost spectral. Some theaters screened it for only a few showings before receiving terse instructions to remove it. Others listed it publicly, printed showtimes, and displayed posters only to receive no usable print at all. A few projectionists even reported that the delivered reels were faulty, incomplete, or formatted inconsistently across different theaters. The entire release felt unstable from the moment it began. Rumors circulating in industry circles suggested that particular action sequences closely resembled material from another international production. Whether the similarities were coincidental, technical, or legally problematic, the distributor's reaction was swift: end the theatrical rollout before questions could surface. By quietly retracting the film, the studio minimized the risk of public scrutiny or legal entanglements. Not long after, U.S. Seals transitioned directly to home video, where it managed to find an audience far removed from the theatrical expectations that had evaporated almost instantly. Fact 15. The Silencers 1996. A hybrid of alien conspiracy themes and high-octane gunplay, The Silencers should have stood out as a bold, genre-blending title. Instead, its theatrical appearance was so brief and inconsistent that it remains one of the era's biggest vanishing acts. In some locations, the film prints arrived only to be recalled before opening night. In others, the movie ran for a day or two before being replaced by more conventional studio releases. Despite marketing materials being distributed widely, the film itself seemed to exist in a limbo between intention and execution. Sources close to the project described deep creative fractures between the director and studio leadership. Disagreements over tone, whether the story should lean into hard-edged action or embrace its pulpy sci-fi elements, caused delays, uncertainty, and a late-stage loss of confidence. The studio, unwilling to risk negative reception, opted for the quietest possible solution: pull the movie before it could gather attention, criticism, or controversy. As a result, The Silencers lived out one of the shortest theatrical runs of its decade, remembered more for its disappearance than for its content. Bonus fact: Executive Decision 1996. Before Executive Decision became recognized as a polished, star-driven studio thriller, its earliest preview engagements unfolded in a way that left an unusual mark on its release history. In a few select markets, the film premiered confidently on a Friday night, complete with audience turnout, press interest, and the typical machinery of a major launch. But by the following morning, theaters received abrupt, almost urgent orders to halt all scheduled showings. No explanation accompanied the recall. No public clarification followed. The film simply disappeared overnight, leaving theater staff as confused as the viewers who had attended that brief early window. The individuals who witnessed those preview screenings unknowingly saw a version of the film that would be replaced within days. When new prints arrived, subtle differences suggested a frantic behind-the-scenes revision. Timing adjustments, tightened sequences, minor continuity corrections. Some industry insiders whispered that technical consultants raised concerns about certain military procedures depicted in the film, prompting the studio to rework key moments before going wide. Others pointed to issues with early audio masters or projection-specific defects that required an immediate swap. None of these theories were ever officially confirmed. What made the event even more mysterious was its selective impact. Only a small number of theaters were affected, and the studio never addressed the recall publicly. For a major action release backed by recognizable stars and a significant promotional push, such secrecy was highly unusual. It was as if the studio wanted to erase the existence of that preliminary version entirely, ensuring that only the corrected cut would define the film's legacy. Today, the story survives only through scattered recollections from audiences and projectionists, those few who experienced a fleeting version of Executive Decision that slipped into the world and vanished just as quickly, leaving behind a quiet riddle in the history of its release. After tracing these vanished releases, films that surfaced for a moment only to be pulled back into silence, you've now stepped into one of the most obscure corners of action movie history. Each title leaves behind a trail of unanswered questions, hints of unseen decisions, and the unmistakable feeling that something happened behind the curtain that audiences were never meant to know. These disappearances don't just erase screenings, they erase entire chapters of cinematic life, leaving only fragmented memories and the faintest traces in newspaper listings or old theater schedules. So now it's your turn. Which of these sudden withdrawals surprised you the most? Which disappearance feels intentional, and which seems like a casualty of chaos? And perhaps more importantly, what other hidden stories from the world of action cinema should we uncover next? Share your theories. Share your suspicions. We'll be here, ready to open the next sealed file.